So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie. So 15 years ago, both you and I, in different parts of the forest, were out in Mauritius covering the murder of Michaela McAreavey, a murder that appeared that it was going to be solved quick, swiftly.
Yeah.
And suspects were rounded up, but my goodness.
I was just never really convinced. I don't know about you, but I remember going to that, the murder investigation team offices. Do you remember that sort of rickety wee colonial building in the middle of the capital of Mauritius? And nothing they were saying was making sense. I mean, I remember you were asking questions, I was asking questions. And I always remember saying, was she sexually assaulted? Was there sexual motive? And the police officer went, no, she was fully clothed. And then seeing the awful crime scene pictures, and she had a bikini on her and a wee skirt wrapped around her. There was all sorts of things that you just thought. I think that Mauritius relied so heavily on tourism at the time, and we'll talk about when I went back. But when I went back, they no longer rely so heavily on tourism. They now have global finance and banking as their main source of income.
What was the capital again? Port
Louis.
Port Louis. Yeah.
And at that stage, they relied so heavily on tourism. There was a real effort to get this solved immediately, to make it look like they were proactive. And the very basic things, I mean, other things. I remember saying, have you checked the hotel guest list against Interpol or whatever to see if there's anyone? No, we don't need to do that. We know who they are.
The guests had been allowed to leave the hotel without being questioned.
There was no police investigation.
There was no...
The guests in that hotel, and we were staying in, I stayed in that hotel, I think you stayed in it too, didn't you? They didn't even know most of them there'd been a murder. I was talking to them, they were going, I don't know what you're talking about. There was a wee bit of blue tape around her room, and they were allowing people to walk in and out of it. I remember going, there was one sole lonely forensic guy standing there, and I had said to him, I'm a journalist. He went, do you want to come in and take a picture of me in the room? And I was like, no, because I didn't want to go in and contaminate a crime scene. But it was just
strange. I remember the that police, the head of the police that time, and I think we might have asked him what was their rate for solving murders in the country, and I think he told us it was 100%.
I think he said there had been 36 or something, and making this up after many years, but something like that. There was like 32 or 36 murders in the last year. So many of those been solved. I mean, all of them.
All of them, yeah.
Which would indicate that they're either the best or the worst police force in the entire world. And there was nothing that I seen to indicate they were the best, let me tell you. It was a ramshackle investigation from the start. And then there was so much of an outpouring of sympathy on the island for Michaela and her family. I remember going to a lovely mass on the other side of the island that had been arranged by local nuns, and the church was packed full of people. But because of everything that went on, that sympathy eroded very quickly, and they, this was, this is a witch hunt against local people, because and they started claiming that she was this rich foreigner from this powerful family and all, and Mickey Hart was the Tyrone manager at the time, but they were getting on as if that meant it was like Alec Ferguson or something. I mean, the GA is an amateur sport, this was, but there was so much misinformation. And when I went back, all those years later to make the documentary that I made with the BBC, we went to the old newspaper archive, and it was amazing, because the week after the murder, it was this picture of this beautiful, and she was very beautiful, this beautiful woman, getting married, all these lovely pictures, and the poor Irish woman that was murdered. This was terrible. And then as you went on, her picture kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Really? Yeah.
And the picture of the suspects kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was miscarriage of justice, police corruption, and it changed, and you could see the sympathy changing, and it was just there on the front pages of the papers.
And I suppose just to recap, so it was January 10th, 2011, and she was on honeymoon with her then husband, John. They had done whatever, they'd gone to the pool that day. I think they'd gone for lunch. She had gone back to the room to collect a packet of biscuits so as they could have a cup of tea and some biscuits, and she didn't come back.
Yeah.
He followed after her, and made the discovery of her floating in a bath. Now, the rooms had these huge, big, kind of like roundy
Yeah.
baths with the probably
It was a
jacuzzi.
honeymoon hotel, so
The
there was a
honeymoon
big
hotel.
circular bath,
Yeah.
almost in the middle of the room.
Yeah, almost in the
Yeah.
middle. Yeah, there wasn't quite a bathroom.
And it wasn't even a
So,
wall between it. I think it was like a screen sort of almost between the room and the bath. It
yes,
was, very designed for honeymoon couples.
for sure. And balconies overlooking the
Yeah.
sea. Beautiful, beautiful resort and all the rest of it. Initially, as the news started filtering back, the police over there had brought John McAreavey into
Yeah.
custody and questioned him. Roughly, it would later emerge. And then, as the time went on, and the Irish ambassador, who I think was the nearest, was based in South Africa at the time, came to the island, and the pressure kind of went on from here as well.
Yeah.
There was a group of men rounded up who worked in the hotel, and there was a narrative that there was a theft ring and that they were stealing coins and stuff from rooms of very wealthy people. It was a very poor place. Port Louis itself was.
There was a theft ring in the hotel they were stealing, but they were stealing such small amounts of money that for a long time it wasn't noticed. And I don't know about you, but like when I'm on holiday, if I left, a handful of euros on a dressing table and someone come in and took 10 of them, I wouldn't notice. Or they come in and took
No,
20 of
and
them,
of
I wouldn't
course there was
notice.
different currency as well in
Now, if they started
Mauritius.
taking, I know, and which, you can understand
There
anyway,
was
if you were a
hundreds of
foreigner.
thousands, and you
You'd
couldn't.
millions,
Yeah.
it was worth 10p, but it was, you wouldn't notice. I
No.
don't think you'd have noticed a few notes missing anyway. So this had been going on for a very long time. The staff that were rounded up, I had actually seen the security guard walking around the resort while I was there, and then the next time I seen him was him being dragged into the court, which was way out in a sugar plantation at the time. That wee court's closed now. But it went on. At that stage, I was entirely unconvinced. So what had happened was, as you said, I think that John McAreavey had went for a golf lesson that morning. Michaela had went for a pool day around, so she's lying by herself around the pool. He had went to play golf. He came back and they arranged to have lunch together in one of the wee sort of pool bars. They had their lunch, and then she had brought all of these biscuits with her. She didn't drink; she was teetotal, but she apparently had a wild sweet tooth, and so she carried loads of biscuits around with her everywhere she went on holiday. She then took the key. She didn't have her key with her. He had the only key. She took the key, said, "Order me a tea. I'm going to fly back to the room and I'll be back." So he's sitting there, paid the bill. She still hadn't come back. He went to the room, knocked the door. There was no reply, and he didn't have a key.
Yes.
So then he had to go, which was a fairly a track right
It
to
was,
the hotel reception.
yeah.
It was a massive resort. So he tracks up to the hotel reception, and he tells reception, and there's a bellboy there. And they said the bellboy walked down with him and opened the door. So he walks back down with the bellboy. The bellboy opens the door and he goes into the room, and Michaela is floating in the bath. Now he, I think, originally thought that maybe she had got into the bath and passed out because she had taken a period, I think, that morning, and she was in pain. She was saying she was cramping. He thought maybe she'd get into a warm bath or something, and she'd passed out. Hadn't realised she'd been murdered. He lifts her out of the bath and tries to do some kind of CPR on her. At this stage, she'd probably been dead for quite some time. The official line that the police were telling us at the time was that she had walked into the room, found this robbery gone wrong. They had killed her, they'd strangled her, and they had placed her in the bath of water. And
In order to make it look like a drowning or an accident.
to wash evidence off her.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
And none of that to me made particular sense, because to escalate a petty robbery to a murder was a strange thing to do. Also, the room she was in was almost identical to the room I was staying in, and so you come in through a door, through a corridor, but the whole back wall of the room was glass sliding doors, so if she'd have walked in and seen them, they could have possibly just run out the door. I do think that there has been a robbery motive that's involved in it, but you wonder what other motives were going on, what was happening at that time. The police just seemed to me, and this is why I didn't think that the trial was ever going to be successful, and I know that the McAreaveys and the Harts thought differently, and I know they still do, and they really hope that they hope against hope that there's going to be justice. They seem to say, arrest these people and make a case around them rather than make a case and arrest the people, because it all happened so quick. And there were so many things were happening were completely unprofessional. I mean, I remember sitting typing away in the room. I was panicking because I was thinking, like, I'm not even sure these guys are guilty. I mean, I think that someone in this hotel has clearly killed this poor woman. but who is it? Have they arrested the right person?
Are
is the
they
person
still there?
still running around? And I'm sitting here on my own
Yeah.
at night in a room that the patio door of my door didn't even lock properly, thinking, what's going to happen? Thinking, am I going to be murdered? And they'll just fit some waiter up for it, do you know what I mean? And move on with their lives. But it was, because I was on my own at that time and I was constantly speaking to people in the hotel, and it was clear that the aim of that hotel, and the manager came down and spoke to us at one stage, the aim was just get this to get sorted and go away, and the night I arrived, and it was only a couple of days, I mean, that flight was desperate, wasn't it? It was like an 11, the first flight I did, it was direct from Gatwick, and it was 11 hours.
Yeah.
You were knackered getting off the flight, and I got off the flight and had to hit the ground running straight away and go and speak with the police and then speak with people in the hotel. And to me, I thought I was going to come off to this murder scene and this, the way crimes had covered in the past would be, and it wasn't that. There was just
people were milling about doing the normal thing. And the thing
I
is, of
walked back
course,
into the hotel and there was a romantic singer singing, beautiful love songs and candles
and they
floating
were
on the
throwing
pool, and
petals
I'm
around
thinking,
our feet everywhere we
there's
went, not
someone-
realising we were journalists there to
Yeah.
cover a
I
horrific
think they thought
murder.
I'd been jilted at the altar. I went into the room and there was rose petals and all on the bed, and I'm like, why do they think I'm here on my own?
But the thing was, and what the unfortunate thing, of course, was, had they done the job properly and exactly, they got the suspects and they made the crime fit where
Instead,
they
I was
were.
doing it the other way around.
But if they'd done it the other way around, like a hotel is the brilliant crime scene as such, because your
contained.
clock, it's contained, your clock coming in and out, you had the key cards on the doors.
CCTV
The
everywhere.
room was cleaned every night, so you had kind of clean prints could have been got, etc. And the movements of all those suspects were...
Initially, they did arrest John McAreavey and held him. And I mean, I know the poor man must have been in the worst state of trauma imaginable. That would probably be pretty standard anywhere. You just assume that the first person that found the partner, and they quickly ruled him out because clearly he was sitting in the restaurant the entire time. CCTV showed he was nowhere near the room at that time. She is singing into the room and he clearly is not following her into the room. And there was some blind spots in the camera, and the people who were arrested, one of them was a security guard, and so he was able to make fake key cards. So he was copying the skeleton key and making fake key cards and then handing them out, and they were using that then to steal money, and that much was obvious. But they didn't do due diligence in terms of making sure that they had all the evidence before arresting these guys. And what they also did, which I think didn't play very well on the island, is they used one of them as a witness, and they believed, people on the island, his life was then hell. He then took his own life. He doesn't, he's not alive anymore. And when I'm back to make the documentary, I went to speak to his wife, who was one of the few people who wouldn't go on camera. She spoke to me extensively at length, a very young woman who was clearly traumatized as well. And she had said at that stage, there was times when she would have changed her story and said that he was telling the truth and everything he said was truth. And other times she would said he was made to say this, and, he was left in a position where he was ostracized completely. And then she said the community abandoned him. And no, it's okay, I've got support. But we went and spoke to other neighbours, and they said, he was completely ostracized because he was seen to be a traitor that went and gave evidence against other local people on behalf of a foreigner, which is how it was being treated then, which it wasn't when we were there first. At the start, you could see there was genuine... They're
And of
lovely,
course,
they're
it was-
lovely people.
But after the trial, it was really the judge who called a halt to it all, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean...
I think the judge realised that this is just not right.
The trial
here.
was absolutely horrific for the family too, and I think at one stage they were having to almost police escort John McAreavey and his sister and Michaela's brother in and out of the court. I mean, it got really nasty and heated. I mean, it must have been the worst experience ever.
Because the locals believed,
this
and
stage
rightly so, that there was a fit up here.
Yeah,
that,
they believed that these people had been fitted up, and it just became really, really aggressive. And yet the local press, if you go back and look, I mean, that was the narrative that they were running, that this was a stitch up. And you find out really at the time. I suppose my whole brief was to get the story of Michaela and what had happened and the murder and the facts. And I spoke at the time to the president at the time, the Prime Minister, President of Mauritius. I spoke to him, I spoke to senior police officers, I spoke to local people, I spoke to the hotel owner, all of that. But when I went back then 10 years later with the BBC, I suppose you have a different, because you're then saying, well, like, let's look at this with a wider lens and see what happened. And so we again go back and retrace and speak to all the same people again. But we also spoke then to the defense lawyers who became almost famous and part of the story. And they are a colorful bunch, I have to say. Um, and most of them were educated in England. They all go to England to study law. Mauritian law, because obviously it was a colonized country, their law is very similar to UK sort of common law. It'd be a very, very similar pattern, which for me meant it easy to understand rather than, Spanish law, which is difficult to understand. But they were called, the local media called them the Avengers.
Right.
They are like superheroes, and they went around, and they lived in very nice houses, I have to say, compared to how the way most normal people
They
live.
made their names.
Yeah.
So 15 years on, but there's little hope ever of any justice for it, which must be
No,
very
and
hard
this is what
on
I
the
mean. When you
family.
spoke to the defense lawyers, they then started telling. We went into a story. And we also spoke to a guy who worked in a wee ramshackle office because he gave his time up for free. Who was someone who was very involved in sort of human rights. The amount of people who die in custody in Mauritius is shocking. The police, while we were there was a video running on the local news of them taking a guy out and putting him inside a tire. So he was trapped, his arms inside like a large tractor tire, and beating the life out of him in a sugarcane field. And this was running on a loop on the local media while we were there. So this was happening in real time. I think at one stage they said since 2005, up to 500 people had died in custody or shortly after being released from custody. Mauritius is a country of 1.5 million. Northern Ireland is a country of 1.9 million. Can you imagine if 500 people had died in custody in that period of time? The defence lawyers were saying people's mothers don't phone us up and say, he has been arrested. Can you get to the station before they charge him? Something he didn't do. They say, can you get to the station before they kill him? And that is the view of the police there. So the police are viewed very dimly. They didn't have very advanced forensics again, which didn't help, because there's obviously forensics in that hotel room that could have easily led to a conviction for Michaela's killer, but it was all done in such a ramshackle way. They refused help of other outside police agencies, which could have maybe helped and brought some expertise to it. The whole thing was shambolic. I felt no more hopeful going back that they're ever going to get justice then. And I know that they won't want to hear this, and I'm sure they'll not be happy listening to me saying this, but I just don't think that at this point, imagine if they couldn't get it then, how are they going to get it now when all of this has moved on? One of the guys who was a suspect was actually in a mental hospital while I was there, so he's clearly never getting fit to stand trial.
Opportunities lost and opportunities
It's just
missed
gone.
in the
It is
passage
gone.
of time.
And I left there when I was there in 2011. I remember going to get the plane home and saying at the airport, I will never step foot back on this island again. You couldn't, if you said to me you have one, all-inclusive 5-star 2-week break in Mauritius, I'd say, no, thank you. You keep that. I don't want it. And then I did go back, and I did go back only because I thought it was an unfinished story, and I wanted to go back and finish it. And I went back, and I went to the airport again the second time and said, I will never be back in that place. It is just not for me. And as I said, now there's even more. If you thought there was corruption and things that went on that island then, now the whole place is built up full of high-rise buildings with African banks' names on it.
Right.
And there's a lot of financial banking and a lot of money flowing through there. They're no longer reliant on tourism in the way they did. And they're certainly not reliant on sugarcane production, which is now...
But it didn't seem as if the tourism industry was affected.
No, because
Ultimately, they were
tourism
very worried about it.
tourism in Mauritius never leaves their hotels.
Yeah.
There are people on honeymoon who just want a really luxury experience. So they want to go to the spa, they want to go to the pool, they want gorgeous restaurants, and all of that existed. It's not the kind of place where you go and you go out touring around the island. Apart from sugarcane, there wasn't a lot to see. I didn't know a lot about Mauritius, and I consider myself something of an expert. So it was a completely uninhabited island. And as you know, the national bird is the dodo, which was quickly made extinct when settlers found it and settled on it. And they used African slaves to grow sugar on it. And when slavery was abolished and the African slaves couldn't be used to work for nothing anymore, then they brought loads of people from the Indian Asian subcontinent. So you can see that in the population.
Yeah.
This is a sort of plantation, if you like, of a false population. So a lot of people, they speak French, but they speak a type of French Creole. I did French in school and couldn't understand hardly a word of it. And they, so a lot of people you would see, and they're of African descent, and that's way back in the times of slavery. But the majority of people are of Indian descent. the majority of them are Hindu or some kind of Christian. And they were lovely, very gentle people. Like I remember going and knocking doors of people who'd been arrested and their wives answering the door. And even when they were telling you to go away, they were doing it in a, I am sorry, I am so sorry, but I can't speak to you. Could you please? No, I'm sorry. And I'm thinking these are the politest people
They were
I've
very
ever
gentle.
met.
Yeah. And no doubt people, the hotel name changed, as is often the way with
Well, I
when
went back
something
to it's
terrible
completely
happens.
been refurbished now. It doesn't look like the same hotel.
And I'm sure those who check in don't even know what happened.
No, that room is still very much in operation, albeit it is unrecognizable from what it was. It is still completely beautiful. It's not so much honeymoon. I had a lot of families there when I was there because remember it's banking now, so there's a lot of people from the Middle East and everything who are involved in banking who are now they're working, and a lot of them have their families and they're going up there for their lunch and dinner. So it's a very different vibe than there was
Yeah.
when we were there. But, in terms of poor Michaela, when I think of her whole life ahead of her, and they'd been to Dubai before that, they'd done a week in Dubai and then they were doing a week in Mauritius and then coming home. And, this was to be their sort of beachy part of their holiday, him playing golf, her getting a tan, and having lovely dinners at night. And for something like that to happen, it's just, I mean,
And she's frozen forever in those photographs.
isn't she? And her wedding dress that she was buried in.
Yeah. No, terribly sad. Okay, we'll leave that for the moment there. If you are already a subscriber to crimeworld.com, you've probably binged on our 6-part deep dive into the life and the rise of the dapper Don Christy Kinahan. From the streets of Dublin to the head of a global cartel, what made and moulded the ambitious Kinahan? And where is he now as he runs from the law? For those of you who haven't joined us yet, here's a short extract from our exclusive series, which is just a click away. So we're going to do a rest here. We're going to start this tome, which is the sort of the life and crimes of Christy Kinahan Sr., who has to be the most fascinating individual in the entire sort of Kinahan cartel set. He is an intriguing character, to say the least.
I think he's the most interesting of all the gangland criminals, really, if you see where he's come from and where he's ended up and how he's managed to navigate through all of those eras of organised crime. An incredible story. If he was involved in another arena of life, he'd be regarded as a kind of heroic businessman. But of course he's not. He's involved in a murderous cartel. But an incredible story.
And there's a little bit of intrigue and mystery to his background, which we're going to go into. Some of it is clear, and other bits, the stories that go around the mix, and you can never, like for example, some people would say he was a heroin addict. I know he did tell the courts at one point that he did, but he did it for a reason. And the reason was he wanted a free education.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting, the heroin addict, and maybe we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to it because that is something that, certainly some people close to him say that was never the case.
Yeah.
And those who are sort of, I suppose, become his enemies in more recent times would definitely say that, like it's a
stick to beat him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's other little bits that are unusual. We'll start and we'll go through as much as we know factually, and then we'll also discuss the rumours. So he's born in 1957. He's 6 years older than Jerry the Monk Hutch, which just gives him a little bit of a, we can see where he is. He's what I would always say was into the bosom of a respectable middle-class family. Now, some intrigue comes with this. His father, to my understanding, was a taxi driver who worked the Gresham rank on Stephen's Green. And that would have been a good job.
That would have been a good job, a well-earning job. Certainly taxis, back in the day when taxis were protected. His father was also at some point registered, or went, I think, on as a dairy farm manager, and also people would say he was involved in kind of street trading. Not, as a lot of people in Dublin would have been over the years, involved in some stalls and selling in that sort of arena. So Christy Kinahan is raised in Cabra, but his birth cert says that he was born in England, in a place called Perryvale, near Ealing, I think, in London. So this is the late 1950s, when at that time in Irish history, we were, there was high unemployment. A huge number of people left Ireland to go to England at times to get work. Many of them returned, but that would have been one of the big points of emigration, where young couples got married and went over there. Certainly, Christy Kinahan wasn't raised in England, but he certainly does seem to have lived there at times. He's had connections to Birmingham and that sort of area, maybe all his life. So he's described, I suppose, as having a middle class upbringing.
Well, I suppose the first house that we can look upon that we know he was in as a child, and he was the only boy in a family of 3 girls, Denise, Maria and Sally Ann. The mother appears to run a B&B from what is a generous Edwardian house. Do you know the name of the road?
Charleville Road.
Charleville Road.
So, I mean, yeah, I know it well. I mean, I would have grown up very close to there. I mean, those houses are worth a huge amount of money. Now, like a lot of houses in that area, for example, those big houses on the North Circular Road, which aren't far away, there probably would have been times where you would have picked them up at a bargain price, but it would be at very, very far away from some of the figures we've discussed. For example, the grinding poverty in which Jerry Hutch would have been born into. Certainly Christy Kinahan would have been raised in something that's now worth a huge amount of money, that home. And it's
would they have always been a middle class sort of a home? We're using that term very loosely here. That's part of East Cabra. Yeah. Right now, if you walk through East Cabra now, you can't. There's organic coffee shops and all of that sort of stuff, and houses being sold for routinely close to $500,000. Like back in the 60s, it wouldn't have been so much like that, I think. And those houses, like a lot of places in sort of Stony Batter or somewhere like that, those houses wouldn't have been seen as posh houses. Would a taxi driver's wage have bought that house?
Well, it would have. It would have. I mean, it would be far, far bigger than most houses in that area, and would have cost a lot of money. But I suppose it's a different context, and Cabra would have been different then. Christy Kinahan would have been growing up in the 60s, early 70s when he's a teenager, and Cabra at that stage would have been a lot kind of wilder, I suppose. Like a lot of areas, there was a lot of homes built at one stage, and young people grew up, and it certainly would be a far more settled area, just like places like Crumlin and Drimnagh have become far more settled as the time has gone on. So he would have been brought up in an area that I wouldn't describe as being a sort of upper middle class area. He would have been grown up in a working class area, in a big house in a working class area, really.
And yeah, it's the big house.
Yeah.
It's an impressive looking house. It always would have been. We do have some suggestion that the family originally lived in St. Teresa's Gardens.
Yeah.
To go from St. Teresa's Gardens to Cabra and to this Edwardian period property is a huge leap.
It is a huge leap, and people would have said to me, for example, that the connection between the Kavanagh and the Kinahan family, for example, has always been a bit.
This is Bomber Kavanagh's parents.
This is Bomber Kavanagh's parents would have known Christy Kinahan's dad. They would have been friendly. All those people have no involvement in crime. There's no suggestion of that, but that it would have been, I suppose, maybe not as straightforward as this is he's a middle class guy. It's somewhere along that line, I suppose. And like most Irish people have, the poverty is only one generation away, I suppose.
Well, he certainly had aspirations, and he was very smart. In school. Though it is said, and it just shows you when somebody gets as big a news story as Christy Kinahan that his leaving cert results have been made public. Do you know that? Didn't know that.
And maybe not made public, but the Sun did a story about how he actually failed his leaving.
Right.
So Christy Kinahan, look, there's no doubt about him being smart, but certainly that was said that he only passed 2 subjects. He would have gone to, it said he went to Declan's in Cabra first and got expelled, and then went to O'Connell's in the North Inner City. Now, O'Connell's Christian Brothers School, probably one of the most famous schools in Dublin. My own father would have gone there. People would have got a scholarship, and it would have seemed to have been a really prestigious school. Past pupils would have included James Joyce, Pat Kenny, the broadcaster, former Taoiseach Sean Lamass, PJ Mara. Also, interestingly, and probably a relative contemporary of Christy Kinnan would have been Tony Gregory would have gone there, who would play a huge prominent role in the anti-drugs marches in the city. So he would have gone. He would have, again, that would have been sort of a prestigious school. But he seems to have not thrived. And then I think we get into a bit of a grey area when he leaves school.
But he excelled, apparently, at sport and at kickboxing.
Yes, and that was a thing that he kept up, I think, through all his life, one way or another. And obviously his sons would have a huge interest in boxing as well.
If you liked what you just heard, go to crimeworld.com now and subscribe for more ad-free listening, exclusive content and the best crime stories around.